In this video, we will talk about coding qualitative data. And I should start by saying that you do not have to code your data in a qualitative research project. Coding is a technique that can be useful for you when analyzing your data, but you do not have to use this technique. The main purposes of coding is firstly to reduce your data, to split up the data in smaller, let's call them building blocks or Legos, and give each block or Lego piece a label or a name. That's what we call the code. And secondly, once you've reduced or split up your data, you want to organize the data to find out how the different building blocks or Legos relate to each other and be able to sort and organize your data, not according to when in an interview a certain topic was mentioned and when during an observation you noted down something in your field notes, or when something appears in a text that you're analyzing, but to reorganize these topics according to the logic you want to present them in your master thesis. So that's coding. A code can be defined as a word or sentence which expresses or summarizes the main idea in a data segment. And really what you code depends on the research question and the concept theories you used. Coding is not a precise science. Coding is also about interpretation. It's not about finding the right labels. It's about finding some labels or codes that help you to understand what your data is about, to help you to see some topics, some similarities, some differences within your data across different units of analysis, different interviews, different sets of field notes, or different texts that you've been analyzing. And coding can be both concept-driven or theory-driven or data-driven. So you can start in your data material and code based on what you see there, or you can start by using concepts or ideas based on the theories and literature that you've been reading that are useful for you in order to make sense of the data material. And you can use both the concept-driven or the data-driven type of coding at the same time, varying between the two. So the idea is, as visualized here in the figure on the right, that for each of your data sources, whether these are interviews or text or field notes, you might apply the same code to different parts of your data in order to see the similarities between these different data sources. Coding is also sometimes referred to as developing categories. Let's look at an example of coding. Let's say that you have interviewed a student who's been moving away from home for the first time, and you're doing a study on what it's like for students to move away from home. And this is a part of one of the interviews that you've been doing, where the interviewer says, "When you move into your own home, you're alone. There is no bustle of people around the house. I miss having someone to chat to when I get home. I put the TV or some music so there's some background noise. The silence makes me feel so alone. Sometimes I will be sat watching trash TV and thinking I should be out doing something rather than watching this rubbish. I read a lot, but sometimes I am too tired and just want to veg out. But it's been good to move out of mom and dad's, as it's not healthy to rely on them as they won't last forever. I become independent and made my own decisions. It's good they're still there when I need them. It's good to have some distance, as when I was home I was arguing a lot with my dad, and that was what made me decide it was time to go." And by coding this excerpt from an interview, you could, for instance, use codes such as loneliness. In the beginning of this excerpt, the interviewer talks about being alone. So maybe you want to make a code that's called loneliness. And whether you call this code loneliness or being alone, that's totally fine. And you can also change the name of the codes that you're using as your understanding of your data develops. Then maybe you want to include a code called importance of noise. That's what I decided to call this code. And then there's a code I called I should. I thought it was interesting reading this interview excerpt that the interviewee used the term I should. I'm not sure exactly how to interpret it. So I just write it down as a code, and then later on I can start thinking more about what this means. And then there's also in this section of the interview some challenges related to living alone that I write down as a code, a bit of a longer code. Then towards the end of this segment, the interviewee starts talking about the relationship to the parents, so I use that as a code. And then I use the term that the interview used, I become independent. I could also have called this code independence. And then later a code called distance, and then again a relationship, but this time to the father. And as you continue then, let's say this was part of an interview and you've been doing several interviews with different students on the topic of moving away from home, you might see that some of the codes, you use them several times, maybe relationship to parents, maybe independence, how to deal with loneliness, challenges related to living alone, are codes that you will use several times. Maybe the code challenges related to living alone ends up being quite a big code, and you want to split it up into different types of challenges and use those as separate codes. And maybe there are some codes that you realize you only use them once and they didn't really give you too much. But using codes in this way is a way for you to become more familiar with the data, to read it more in detail, to start thinking about and trying to summarize for yourself what is in here, what does the interview talk about, what does the text talk about, what happened when I was observing that I wrote down in my field notes. You can code your data in different ways. You can use pen and printed transcripts, like this example here, which is where I took the excerpt that I went through on the previous slide. And as you see here, the person coding in this image, that's not me, has coded in a totally different way from what I did in the previous slide. And that's totally fine. Here, the researcher has emphasized some feelings that I didn't really emphasize. Maybe I didn't see it when I was reading the interview segment the first time. And maybe I would see it in a later interview and then go back to this interview and look for feelings in this interview. And maybe feelings would be central to my analysis in the end, even if it wasn't in the beginning. So analysis and coding is always happens in kind of like a circular process where you might have to go back to an interview, go back to your field notes, go back to the text that you're analyzing several times, because your understanding of your data develops as you read. When you get to text number 4, you have a different understanding of your whole data than when you read the first text. So you might need to reread the first text or the first interview transcription. So as I said in a previous video, make sure to have enough time to analyze your data, because it is time consuming. As an alternative to using pen and printed transcripts or printed documents, you can also do this coding exercise in Word or in Excel. It really depends on what you feel most comfortable doing. Some people like to use color codes. You can do that using both pen and printed transcripts, and you can use color codes in Words or in Excel. Both are fine. It's also possible to use special software that has been developed for qualitative analysis. I've included the names of some of these softwares: NVivo, Atlas, Hyper Research, Open Code. These softwares, they don't do the coding for you. You cannot just kind of import the data and then you get the codes out, but they can be useful, especially if you have a larger set of data, to get an overview of your data. And some people like to use software, and then using this kind of software can be useful. However, you should be aware of that most of these software you have to pay for them, and they're not that cheap. Open Code is free. I've linked to it in Canvas. The others are a bit pricey, so if you decide to spend money on this, you should probably try to think about whether this is worth the money. And you don't need to use this kind of software to analyze your data material, especially in a master thesis. It's totally enough and fine to use either pen and printed transcripts or Word or Excel or any other kind of simple software to analyze your data. Good luck working on coding your data.